I built my first company in a garage that smelled of solder, sawdust, and burnt coffee. Back then, our computers ran hotter than our ideas, and every night I'd fall asleep to the sound of cooling fans like tiny industrial lullabies. That was 40 years ago. Now, the headquarters of Holt Industries towers over the skyline. A 30-story glass prism that catches every sunrise like a trophy raised to endurance. What began with 3 people and a rented fax machine became a multi-million-dollar empire, whose name, my name, glows in silver letters above the city's busiest avenue. Holt. There was a time when I thought legacy meant numbers, patents, and balance sheets. But the longer I've lived, the more I realize legacy is written in people, and people can corrode faster than metal. My name is Raymond Holt, and though I founded this company brick by brick and bite by bite, I've stepped back these past few years. My daughter, Emily, and her husband, Dylan Merritt, began taking the reins. They told me it was time to rest, to enjoy the quieter seasons. I smiled, letting them believe I agreed. In truth, I wanted to see what kind of leaders they'd become without my hand on the wheel. From my glass-walled office on the 42nd floor, I used to watch Dylan pacing the boardroom like a wolf in a tailored suit. He was the image of modern leadership, sleek, articulate, permanently wired into his phone. Ambitious, yes. Visionary, maybe. But ambition without gratitude is wildfire. It consumes whatever shelters it. Emily was different. She had my late wife's steadiness, her empathy. When she was little, she'd sit beside me sorting bolts while I built prototypes on the kitchen table. She learned how things fit together before she learned algebra. That patience made her brilliant in negotiation rooms where others lost their tempers. I believed, foolishly, that her warmth could balance Dylan's hunger. The first cracks appeared almost invisibly, an overlooked invitation here, a postponed meeting there. Then the accounting updates stopped arriving in my inbox. I asked about them once. Dylan smiled as though he were reassuring a kindly old neighbor. Just streamlining, Ray. You don't need to worry about the operational clutter anymore. He called me Ray. That was new. The name felt like a dismissal, not an endearment. At night, I'd return to my apartment overlooking the river, where the city lights bled into the glass like molten circuits. I'd pour myself a small scotch, open the quarterly reports, and scroll through figures that no longer lined up the way they used to. Funds had begun migrating between subsidiaries with oddly similar names, contracts amended with electronic signatures that mimicked Emily's phrasing, but not her tone. I'd spent decades reading between lines. These lines were shouting. Dylan was hiding something, and he was betting that age had dulled my sight. The week before the annual shareholder meeting, he invited me to lunch at a restaurant so high above traffic, it felt detached from the world below. Everything in that place reflected light. Glass walls, silver cutlery, mirrors polished to vanish edges. Succession planning, he said between sips of mineral water. Legacy protection. Standard procedure. He placed a folder on the table. Cream paper. Embossed header Holt Industries Board Transition Agreement. It's just paperwork to formalize what's already happening, he explained. You'll still be Chairman Emeritus. Honorary. No liability. No stress. You've earned your rest. His tone was a perfect alloy of charm and calculation. I opened the folder. My name glared up at me from the signature line like a verdict already typed. The contract's preamble droned on about continuity, stability, and shareholder confidence. But halfway down page 2, a clause caught my eye. In the event of the founder's voluntary retirement, controlling shares revert to the active executive board. Clever. Surgical. A guillotine hidden in. Grammar. I looked up at him. You've been studying the fine print. He grinned, modestly feigned. You always said the fine print is where empires are won or lost. I did say that. And I meant it. He watched me, waiting for resistance. When I stayed silent, he filled the gap with false comfort. This will make Emily happy, Ray. She worries about you. We all do. I kept my eyes on the text. Decades of boardroom battles had taught me that silence is its own weapon. It draws truth to the surface like oil through sand. I could feel him growing restless under it. Finally, I said, "Do you have a pen?" He handed me one black lacquer, my gift to him from his first year in the company. He didn't remember. I signed, slowly, each letter of my name carved deep enough to dent the table through the page. "There," I said. "Done." The satisfaction that bloomed on his face told me everything I needed to know. Relief first, then the glint of victory. He reached for the folder like a man retrieving a crown. I stood, adjusted my jacket, and nodded toward the window. "You've done well, Dylan. Truly. The city looks different from up here, doesn't it?" He followed my gaze, mistaking my tone for nostalgia. What he didn't see was the second document I slid quietly into my briefcase, a duplicate contract I'd prepared myself weeks earlier, on with a reinstated clause from our company's founding charter. It stated that in the event of fraudulent action or falsified documentation related to board decisions, all affected shares revert to the founder's trust. A clause I'd buried decades ago to protect against hostile takeovers. Dylan never noticed its resurrection. As I walked out of the restaurant, the sun caught the mirrored buildings opposite and threw light across my path so sharply it made me squint. Behind me, Dylan shook hands with the waiter, already planning whatever celebration follows betrayal. I could almost hear his mind racing press releases, shareholder praise, the illusion of control. I let him have it. For now. That night, the city felt unusually loud. Cars hummed beneath my balcony like restless machinery. I sat in the dark, the folder on my lap, rereading every page under the faint blue glow of the television. My reflection stared back from the window, a tired man. "Yes, but not a defeated one," I whispered to it, to the face that built an empire from nothing. Let him think the old man's asleep. 2 weeks later, at the annual shareholder meeting, he would discover that the trap he built was never his to spring. The night after I signed the retirement agreement, the city felt like a machine running without oil. Everything carried a slight grind. Elevators shuddered. Doors hissed too long before closing. Even the river below my balcony moved like a conveyor belt in a factory I no longer owned. I stood with a glass of water in my hand and watched the reflections of billboards shiver on the black surface. Each ad pulsed on a timer, selling a future that already belonged to someone younger. On the coffee table, the duplicate contract I had slipped into my briefcase lay open like a small metal trap, waiting in tall grass. I knew what I had done. I also knew what it had cost to get here. The cost was not money. Money replenishes. Trust does not. I tried to picture Dylan the first time I met him. He was 27 and eager, a clever mind wearing a borrowed suit. He had brought Emily flowers that night. He remembered my favorite bourbon. He quoted something I had said to a reporter about patience being a form of capital. He looked at me as if I were a lighthouse, and he, the ship that had finally found the right shore. I wonder when that look turned into calculation. I wonder when any of us notice the moment admiration becomes appetite. I turned off the lights and let the apartment shrink to silhouettes. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of a small analog clock I had kept from our garage days. The simple noises of a life kept at the edges of a much larger one. I thought of my wife and the last winter we had together. She used to tease me when I brought work home. She would tap the papers and say, "There is a man here, and there are pages here, and they do not get the same chair." She had a way of restoring proportions. When she died, the papers took her chair and never gave it back. I sat on the couch and opened the folder again. I ran my finger along the paragraph where Dylan had tried to thread the needle. The clause looked clinical, words that would never sweat, never lie awake, never wonder if they had failed a daughter by loving her husband for too long. I felt the humiliation come in like a tide. It started at the edges, at the ankles of memory. Then it climbed. He did not make this up in a week. He built it. He scheduled my absence in meetings. He redirected reports. He coached my daughter into thinking she was protecting me. I had taught him strategy, and he had learned the part where you turn people into pieces on a board. That knowledge burned and then cooled into something steadier. I breathed in the smell of dust warmed by electronics. I held my palms together and felt the calluses that had never fully faded. Sometimes you need to touch the old scars to remember that you survived a first time. There had been so many first times. The first time a supplier refused to extend credit. The first time payroll almost broke us. The first time a client gave us a contract so big it could crush us or crown us. And years later, the first time I left the office early because Emily had a dance recital, and I realized that if the company could not withstand one missed meeting, then it was not a company, it was a cage. I let those memories run like a film on a slow reel. I watched myself young and stubborn, hauling servers up a stairwell because the freight elevator was broken. I watched my wife hand me a sandwich that tasted like relief. I watched Emily fall asleep under a workstation with headphones on, the soft blue glow of the screen turning her cheek lunar. I watched Dylan, years later, in that same glow, learning how to read forecasts and how to read me. The next morning, the office lobby smelled like citrus cleaner and coffee. Holt Industries wakes early. Security nodded at me. People still nodded. That is the strange part about betrayal. Its sound is private. The world does not hear it until the walls come down. I crossed the marble floor, glanced at the backlit letters of my name, and told myself to keep walking. My reflection followed me across the glass panels, a double that looked a little more tired with each pane. On the 42nd floor, the digital display outside the boardroom announced the day's agenda in a polite font. Strategic roadmap, marketing spend, investor Q&A. I ran my thumb along the edge of my access card and pushed open the door to my office. My chair still held the shape of a man who believed in second chances. I closed the door and let the quiet settle. The room had the sterile peace of a gallery. Framed patents on one wall. A photograph of our first team on another. In it, I look impossibly young and impossibly sure. The desk smelled faintly of lemon oil. I sat and waited for the sadness to do what it needed to do. Grief, when you let it, works like a skilled surgeon. It cuts, it stitches, it leaves a line you can live with. When you fight it, it becomes infection. At 9:10 a.m., Emily sent a message asking if I felt all right after yesterday's lunch. I stared at the blinking cursor that waited for my reply. She had no idea. Or maybe she had an idea and was too frightened to look at it. Children, even grown ones, sometimes prefer the lullaby to the alarm. I typed back, "I am fine. Proud of you. See you before the meeting?" I left the message window open and watched our previous exchanges scroll up the screen. Photos of holiday dinners, notes about a new client in Zurich, a message from a year ago where she wrote, "I want to do this right, Dad. I do not want to break what you built." I remember the day that message came. I was in a taxi in the rain. The windshield wipers kept time like a metronome. I replied then with something confident and fatherly. Today, the words dried in my throat. Around noon, I took the stairs down to the server floor. It is always cold there, the kind of cold that wraps the bones and hushes idle talk. The scent is iron and freon, and something sterile that reminds you of hospitals and beginnings. The fan arrays spin in perfect rhythm. Rows of machines blink in patient patterns. If there is anything in this company that has never lied to me, it is this sound. It is the sound of work done without ego. I ran my hand near the grill of a rack and felt the gentle heat. I thought of every night we kept this company alive by believing that the next day would justify the last. The servers believed. They made no speeches about respect or retirement. They just did the work they were built to do. A memory surfaced that I had not visited in years. A winter launch, a critical update, an investor who said we were not tough enough to survive a real recession. I had walked out of that meeting with snow gathering on my shoulders, wondering if anyone could see that doubt had set up camp in my chest. When I reached the office, I found a mug on my desk. The mug said, "Strong takes time." There was no note, only a steam curl rising. My wife had been gone 2 years by then. The mug was from Emily. That night, I did not go home. She did not either. We slept in chairs and woke up new. My phone buzzed. A news alert about a competitor's acquisition. A message from an old friend asking if I was enjoying retirement. The word looked strange on the screen. Retirement sounded like leaving a theater before the final act, and then pretending you are satisfied with the ending someone else describes later. I put the phone face down. In the afternoon, I walked past the boardroom. Through the glass, I saw Dylan presenting to a cluster of executives. He spoke with the confidence of a man who believes the future is obliged to him. His hands cut invisible charts in the air. He clicked through slides about efficiency and restructuring as if he were discussing furniture placement in a home that was not his. I watched his mouth form phrases I had taught him to use. I watched him turn them into blades. He saw me, mid-sentence, and his smile flickered. A small static wave rippled across his face before he smoothed it. He gestured toward a seat at the back of the room, the kind of seat one offers a guest when the plan is already in motion. I held his eyes a moment longer than was comfortable and moved on. I had no desire to sit and watch him stage a scene for an audience that still applauded the wrong character. Back in my office, the afternoon light shifted. The glass turned the sky into a pale canvas cut by the dark wires of window-washing rigs. A faint smell of rain drifted in through a vent. I opened a drawer and took out the pens I have kept since the first loan document I ever signed. I lined them up, oldest to newest, as if arranging a small parade of decisions. The earliest pen was a cheap plastic stick with a cap that never fit. The newest was the lacquered black Dylan had handed me at lunch. The line told a story about value and memory, and the way a tool can betray you if the hand holding it belongs to the wrong heart. That evening, Emily knocked and stepped in without waiting. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She sat, smoothed her skirt, and blinked too much. Then she took my hand like she used to in crowded places when she was small and needed to anchor herself to someone taller. "Dad," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer me like I am still the girl who sorted bolts." The lights in the room hummed. A faint vibration ran through the table from the air unit. I nodded. "Did you sign because you wanted to sign?" she asked. "Or because you felt like we wanted you to?" I studied her face, the same steady eyes that had watched me rebuild a prototype 3 times until it behaved. The same mouth that had pressed into a single determined line when she learned to ride a bike without training wheels. She was not asking about legality. She was asking about loyalty. The word we do not often say out loud in boardrooms because it makes spreadsheets uncomfortable. "I signed," I said, "because I wanted to see what everyone would do when they thought I could not stop them." She flinched, as if something cold had touched her. Her fingers tightened around mine, then let go. "So you do not trust Dylan," she said quietly. "I trust that he is himself," I replied. "The question is whether that self belongs in the chair he wants." She looked down at the table, at my line of pens, at the oldest plastic one lying parallel to the lacquered black. I watched her calculate the distance between the two, like a problem on a test she did not remember studying for. "I thought I was protecting you," she whispered. "From stress, from being dragged into petty fights." She swallowed. "I did not see the other thing." "What other thing?" I asked. "The part where protecting you became allowing him." We sat in that sentence for a while. Outside the glass, the city kept moving. Screens changed. Tires hissed. Somewhere a siren wailed and was answered by another. Inside, only the clock and the breath and the low thunder of the ventilation system measured time. "I will not ask you to choose," I said finally. "That is not the trap. The trap has already been built." It was built the moment someone thought a signature would matter more than the truth behind it. She lifted her eyes and found mine. She had my steadiness and her mother's light. "What happens at the meeting?" she asked. "We find out who loves the company more than they love the mirror," I said. After she left, I let myself feel it all. The line in my chest that had been drawn with a dull knife, the anger that wanted to turn into fire, and the sadness that wanted to turn into ash. I did not let either have me. I stood. I walked to the window. The night had deepened, and the office tower across the street had become a chessboard of lit and dark squares. The reflections made my own tower look doubled, as if I had already built the backup for after the flood. I thought of the garage again, the burnt coffee, the aching wrists, the cracked linoleum with the stain in the shape of an island, the fans that sung us to sleep when we could not afford silence. I thought of the first time someone called me sir without sarcasm. I thought of my wife's hand on the back of my neck when a hard day ended and we survived it. I thought of Emily at the kitchen table labeling bags of tiny screws. I thought of Dylan, somewhere in this building, practicing smiles in a mirror he believed would never crack. Humiliation has a taste, metallic, like you bit your tongue. Injustice has a temperature, feverish at first, then cold, then a kind of clean heat that does not burn but cauterizes. In that heat, a thought arrived and did not leave. I am not here to grieve a theft. I am here to protect a living thing that carries my name but does not belong only to me. Employees whose rent is paid because the servers keep blinking. Clients whose trust rests on our steadiness. My daughter, who needs to remember that dignity is not a rumor. Even Dylan, who needs to learn that love will let you fall if you insist on climbing a ladder you greased yourself. I turned from the window and looked at the small safe beside the bookshelf. Inside, there were copies of our founding documents, and there was the old charter clause I had reinstated. I imagined the paper in my hands, the crisp crackle, the familiar legal type. I imagined presenting it to the room, the echo of the projector fans, the way the air changes when a crowd realizes it has misread the scene. I closed the safe and sat again. I opened a yellow legal pad. I wrote a list. Not of people, of moments. The coffee in the garage. The first night Emily slept under a desk. The mug that said strong takes time. The winter launch. The investor's insult. My wife's chair. The quiet look on Emily's face when she realized protecting me had been a doorway for someone else. I wrote them because I needed to remember that revenge without memory is rage, and rage burns the village you were trying to save. Justice remembers. Justice sorts the bolts. Justice puts the right piece in the right place and refuses to call it mercy when it is simply order. By the time I looked up, the clock said close to midnight. The building had thinned to skeleton staff. The cleaning crew rolled carts that squeaked like tired shoes. Somewhere down the hall, a vacuum started and stopped. I stood, stretched, and turned off the lamps. In the dark, the city outside grew brighter. It is a strange paradox of glass towers that darkness inside becomes a function of light outside. You can see further once you stop lighting your own reflection. I collected the documents and slid them into a slim black case. On my way out, I paused in the lobby. I touched the H in Holt. The metal was cool and honest. I thought of how easily someone can change a sign, but how slowly a name changes its meaning. Names do not belong to plaques. They belong to the work done under them. In the parking garage, the air smelled of concrete dust and old rain. I could hear the sound of my steps and the distant lift of a gate as a car approached the exit. I unlocked my car, set the case on the passenger seat, and sat with my hands on the wheel for a full minute before starting the engine. Above me, a strip of night showed between beams. It looked like a vein in the body of the city. On the drive home, the lights along the river strobed in the corner of my eye. The radio played an old song that had survived every format change. I let it play. At a red light, I glanced at my reflection in the side window and said the thing I had been avoiding all day. He betrayed you. The words landed without ceremony, like a small tool placed back into its slot. The sentence did not hollow me. It clarified me. At home, the apartment greeted me with its familiar silence. I set the case on the table, poured a small glass of water, and stood at the window while the city blinked. I thought of all the times I had believed that strength looked like sound. Tonight I remembered that sometimes strength is the man who closes his mouth so that his mind can speak louder. Enough. The word slid into place like a carefully machined part. Enough hiding what he is behind what I taught him to look like. Enough pretending the cuts were accidents. Enough letting loyalty be the language of those who ask for it instead of those who give it. The sadness did not vanish. It took a seat in the room. The anger did not scream. It sharpened its edge and waited. Something else stood up. Resolve does not shout. It breathes. It puts its hands on the table. It looks at the calendar. It circles a date. It writes a plan in ink that will not run when the water comes. I turned from the glass and opened the case. The documents waited where I had left them, precise and patient. I smoothed the pages once, placed a small tab where the clause lived, and closed the cover. Then I switched off the last lamp, let the city have the windows, and went to bed. I slept like a man who has been cut and stitched. When I woke, the clock on the nightstand glowed steady and unblinking. Morning smelled of coffee and rain. Somewhere in the city, a server fan spun itself awake, and a man rehearsed a speech for a crowd he thought he controlled. Somewhere else, a daughter decided what kind of woman she would be when a room looked to her for the truth. By the time I put on my suit, the day had already chosen its temperature. Cool, clear, the kind of day that makes glass sing. I tightened my tie, reached for the case, and left the apartment with the feeling that the next time I came home, the air would be different. I did not know whether it would be victory or sorrow. I only knew it would be honest. I stepped into the elevator and watched the floor numbers count down. The old sadness stayed upstairs. The clean heat traveled with me. When the doors opened, the lobby breathed out its citrus and coffee. The city breathed in, and I walked into the morning with a simple sentence set, like a steel beam in my chest. Enough. Morning comes sharp. Not the kind that eases in through curtains, but the kind that arrives like a decision. The light slices through the blinds of my apartment, silver and cold, landing across the documents on the table, the contract, the hidden clause, the proof that betrayal wears a suit. I drink my coffee in silence. It tastes stronger today, or maybe I do. There's something strange about the moment when pain turns into focus. It doesn't announce itself. It just clicks, quietly, like a lock turning from the inside. And as the elevator descends toward the parking garage, I know I've stopped being hurt. Now I'm paying attention. When you've built something from dust, you know its heartbeat. You feel when it skips, and Holt Industries. My creation, my second life after my wife died, has been skipping beats for months. This morning, I decide to listen for the rhythm again. The company lobby feels colder than usual. Employees pass by with their eyes lowered, murmuring greetings that sound more like prayers. The digital display wall loops a video about innovation through leadership. Dylan's face flashes across it, smiling, confident, a model of success. I stand there long enough for a security guard to shift nervously before I move toward the elevator. On the 42nd floor, the doors open to the faint sound of laughter. Board members, Dylan's people, the laughter of men who think the old lion's teeth are gone. I walk to my office. The nameplate still says Raymond Holt, founder, etched in brushed steel. Dylan had suggested replacing it last month with founder emeritus. I declined. Inside, my desk is as I left it, minimalist, everything in order. But I notice something new. My access badge has been downgraded. Certain digital folders no longer open. I try anyway. The screen flashes. Permission denied. That, more than the forged contract, makes me smile. Because that's what a guilty man does when he thinks the war is already won. He builds higher walls around a fortress. Designed. I open my leather notebook and begin to write names, dates, amounts, observations. I list every anomaly I've noticed since Dylan began streamlining the company. Sudden consultancy fees, acquisitions under shell companies, shares shifted into quiet corners of the ledger. None of it illegal at first glance. That's the brilliance of modern fraud. It hides behind compliance. By 10 a.m., I've written 5 pages. By 11, I've written a plan. Emily calls me. Her voice carries that slight tremor she gets when she's standing between two loyalties. Dad, Dylan wants to know if you'll attend the press briefing today. He said it would mean a lot. I can hear her trying to keep her voice neutral. I answer softly, I'll be there. Silence stretches. Are you angry? She asks. Not anymore, I say. Anger is for people who still believe they were owed honesty. I know better now, she exhales. I'm sorry, Dad. I know, I tell her. Just keep your eyes open. Don't take anyone's version of truth, not even mine, without reading the fine print. She laughs weakly, recognizing my old phrase. You sound like you're about to teach me a lesson. Maybe, I say. Maybe it's the last one I have left to teach. At noon, I step into the boardroom. The long table gleams like a weapon freshly cleaned. The windows show the city glittering under the noon sun, oblivious to the quiet civil war happening above it. Dylan is at the head of the table, where I once sat for decades. He greets me with the smile of a man who's forgotten who taught him how to sharpen it. Ray, he says, extending his hand. Glad you could make it. I take it. His grip is firm but damp. Wouldn't miss it, I reply. Around us, the board members murmur greetings. Some look uneasy, not out of loyalty to me, but because they can sense the shift in air pressure before a storm. There's something in the silence between words, a static charge that makes people straighten their ties without knowing why. Dylan begins. He talks about vision, progress, restructuring, global scalability. His voice fills the room with the sound of a man narrating his own highlight reel. Every few slides, he looks toward me, as if expecting validation. I give him none. I just watch, calmly, quietly, like a mirror. When he finishes, the board claps. He thanks everyone, then turns to me. And of course, we owe everything to Raymond. His genius built this company, and his trust allows us to move forward. Trust. That word lands heavy in the room. I rise slowly, my reflection ripples. Across the glass wall behind him, an old man framed by his own creation. I appreciate the kind words, I say. Trust, after all, is the foundation of every empire. It's also what brings them down. A few people glance at each other. Dylan shifts in his seat. I smile politely. That'll be all from me, I add, and sit down. The meeting moves on, but Dylan doesn't speak as confidently now. Every time he glances at me, he finds not confrontation, but stillness. And stillness is more frightening than rage. That evening, back in my apartment, I pour another cup of coffee, no scotch this time. I need a clear head. The folder of evidence sits beside my laptop. I begin cross-referencing transactions, building the outline of a financial maze Dylan has been weaving. He's been clever. He's used digital blind spots, time zone transfers, micro-ownership redistribution. But he's missed something simple. One of the holding companies he used still bears a registration trace to a contract I signed in 1998, with a clause binding all derivative entities to the founder's oversight. In essence, every fraudulent transaction he made still passes through my authority. It's small, almost invisible, but it's enough. I lean back, staring at the ceiling. I realize I'm no longer angry. I'm intrigued. It's been years since I've had a worthy opponent. The truth is, I miss the game, the long nights, the quiet strategy, the satisfaction of pulling one thread and watching an entire web unravel. Dylan thinks this is personal. It is, but it's also architectural. It's about restoring the integrity of a structure that someone tried to vandalize. I close my eyes and picture the coming weeks like a chessboard. Each move deliberate, each risk calculated. Dylan's already 3 moves ahead, but he doesn't realize I'm 10 ahead of him. The next morning, the rain returns. I drive to the office early before the others arrive. The parking lot is quiet, the air smelling of ozone and wet concrete. I take the elevator alone. At my floor, I pause outside Dylan's office. Through the frosted glass, I can see the vague outline of his desk, neat, expensive, empty of meaning. Inside, I find a digital frame displaying a family photo. Dylan, Emily, and my granddaughter. She's only 6. Her smile is pure light. I stand there, feeling the dissonance, the picture of family harmony resting on the desk of deceit. It hits harder than the forged signature. I whisper, "You don't deserve her trust either." Then I notice something. A small USB drive plugged into the side of his monitor. He must have left it there overnight. I hesitate, but curiosity wins. I pull it out, slip it into my pocket, and leave. Back in my office, I plug it into a private offline terminal, encrypted files, presentation decks, and one folder titled Transition Plan Final. Inside, a PowerPoint with a headline that makes my stomach clench. Phase 3. Complete founder separation below it. Bullet points. Public framing. Health-related. Step down. Legal team to finalize public rights. Transfer. Post-transition narrative. Modernization under new. Leadership. They were already planning the obituary of my career before I was even gone. I close the laptop gently, like a coffin lid. Then I exhale long, slow, controlled. That was the moment. The breaking point. Not because I was betrayed. I'd already made peace with that. But because they had turned legacy into PR strategy. They had rewritten my story before the ink of my life had dried. I stood and walked to the window. The rain streaked down the glass like veins on the skin of the city. I touched it with my fingertips. "This company breathes because I gave it lungs," I said aloud. "And I won't let parasites steal its breath." The voice that came out of me wasn't the trembling tone of an aging man. It was the quiet certainty of the builder, the one who remembers every bolt, every sleepless night, every risk that almost ended him. The one who knows exactly how much force is required to break a structure because he's built them all his life. I take the contract folder, the USB, and my notebook. I lock them in the black case again. Then I write 3 words on a yellow sticky note and place it on top. He built a coop. Below it, I add, I built the trap. Tomorrow, the planning begins. I have always believed that revenge is a form of architecture. Anyone can break a wall. Few can build one that folds itself back around the intruder. The day after I found Dylan's transition plan, I sat in my office long before sunrise, lights off, the city's reflection hovering in the glass like another skyline laid atop the real one. Every breath of wind that pressed against the window seemed to whisper a single word. I opened the black case, spread its contents across my desk, and began sketching not blueprints for buildings this time, but for justice. My tools were the same: structure, precision, patience. The plan would have 3 stages. First, information. Second, alignment. Third, exposure. And it had to unfold as quietly as the fraud itself had. By 7 a.m., I was already on my way to see Mira Chen, our internal auditor. Mira had been with Holt Industries since the early days, a woman whose moral compass was so precise you could set your watch by it. When I first hired her, she told me she wasn't afraid of making enemies if it meant balancing a ledger truthfully. I told her then, "You'll fit in just fine." She was still here after all these years, and more importantly, she still believed in the company I built. Her office was minimalist, the kind of space that had never once hosted a lie. I stood at her door until she noticed me. "Mr. Holt," she said, standing up quickly. "I wasn't expecting you this early." "I need your eyes on something," I told her. "Quietly," she nodded, gesturing for me to close the door. I placed a folder on her desk, the first set of financial discrepancies I'd traced. "Check these. See if the trail leads where I think it does." Her brow furrowed as she flipped through the pages. "Who has clearance to these accounts?" "Officially, no one." "Unofficially?" I paused. "Dylan Merritt," she froze. "He's the CFO's superior." "I know," she hesitated. "This could blow up everything." "That's the idea," I said, then softened my tone. "But not yet. You'll know when." I left her with a warning. If anyone asks, I was never here. Information, I reminded myself, is most powerful when the other side doesn't know you have it. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a ghost in the building I had built. I moved differently, spoke less, observed more. I spent mornings in the archives, reminiscing to the staff. In reality, I was tracing document chains and verifying digital trails. I learned to read the small signs of guilt, emails that avoided pronouns, memos written too perfectly, eyes that blinked one beat too slow. At lunch, I sat at the employee cafe instead of the executive lounge. People talked freely there. It's remarkable how quickly rumors form in a place with shared coffee spoons. From them, I learned Dylan had already scheduled a board vote to permanently retire the founder's advisory role in 2 months. He was accelerating his coup. Perfect. The tighter he pulled the rope, the less I'd have to. Stage 2. Alignment. Every builder knows that before you raise a wall, you have to make sure the foundation is level. In my world, that foundation was made of people, key board members, old allies, the ones who had been quietly pushed aside during Dylan's rise. I started with Daniel Varga, our head of research. He owed his career to a scholarship the company funded 20 years ago. Dylan had recently cut his department's budget by 30%. I invited him for dinner at a quiet rooftop restaurant. "You know why I like this view?" I told him as the city lights flickered below. "Because from here, everything looks stable. Even if it's not," he smiled thinly. "We're doing what we can." "But Dylan's decisions are aggressive. Short-term aggressive or long-term suicidal?" I asked. He didn't answer, but his silence was enough. "I might need your help soon," I said, sliding a small envelope across the table. Inside was a non-disclosure agreement and a printed chart of our original research funding timeline, the kind Dylan thought no one still had. "Read that carefully. It's not just data, it's proof," he read in silence. When he looked up, his voice had changed. "You're not stepping aside, are you?" "Not yet," I said. "I'm just resetting the balance." Next, I visited Margaret Reeve, the chairwoman of the Ethics Committee. She was in her early 70s, shrewd, calm, with a mind that could slice through pretense like a diamond. Dylan had charmed her once, but Margaret didn't stay charmed for long. She stayed observant. I met her in her home office, walls lined with certificates and old company photos. She poured me tea without asking questions. "I assume this isn't a social call," she said. "No," I admitted. "It's structural maintenance." "Of what kind?" "The kind where termites wear suits." Her laugh was short and bitter. "I thought you'd retired, Raymond." "I did," I said, "but my conscience didn't." I told her what I had discovered carefully, without names at first, just numbers and behavior. She followed every thread like a detective reading a confession. When I mentioned Dylan's forged contract, she placed her cup down slowly. "I always wondered," she said, "why the board's succession vote last spring passed so easily. It wasn't unanimous, but it was unnaturally swift." "Fraud has a way of greasing wheels," I said. I intend to remove the grease. She leaned back. You have proof? I will. Her gaze hardened, the kind that once terrified young executives. Then you'll have my vote. I stood to leave. When the meeting comes, don't flinch. They'll call it revenge. And what will you call it? She asked. Correction. By the end of the third week, I had 6 silent allies. That was enough. The rest would fall in line once the air changed. Stage 3. Exposure. It would happen at the annual shareholder meeting. That was where Dylan planned to announce the transition, where he'd unveil the new leadership structure and parade the board's support before the cameras. He'd already arranged for journalists to attend. Press kits printed with phrases like, "A new era of innovation." He wanted to bury the founder quietly, under applause. He forgot who taught him to hold a shovel. The week before the meeting, I met Emily again. She looked pale, conflicted, like someone standing between 2 versions of the truth. Dad, she said, I've been hearing things. Whispers about audits, about you meeting with board members. Dylan's nervous. Good, I said. She shook her head. Please don't do this as revenge. It'll destroy both of you. I walked to the window. Rain streaked the glass again. Seems the sky itself had joined the conversation. You think this is about him? I said softly. It's about you. About the people who still think integrity is negotiable. About the hundreds of employees who built this company believing their work meant something. Then, why the secrecy? Because truth told too early gets drowned out by noise. She looked at me, searching for something remorse, perhaps. He says you're trying to take the company back. I'm trying to take it forward, I said. And if that means walking through fire, so be it. She bit her lip. Do you hate him? I took a long time to answer. No, hate is too expensive. I'm just done subsidizing his illusions. 3 nights before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the empty office floors, the halls humming faintly with the servers below. In the dim light, the building felt like a cathedral, my life's cathedral. I passed portraits of past milestones, photos of ribbon cuttings, old newspaper clippings framed in glass. The air smelled faintly of metal and coffee. I stopped by the window overlooking the skyline. My reflection merged with the city lights, half man, half shadow. You taught him everything, I whispered to myself. Now teach him the cost. The final preparations were meticulous. Mira finished her audit report, a masterpiece of subtlety, time-stamped, sourced, impossible to dispute. Every manipulated transaction, every concealed transfer, documented. Daniel confirmed the research fund discrepancy, proving that Dylan had falsified reports to redirect profits into personal ventures. Margaret quietly alerted legal counsel to remain on standby during the meeting. Meanwhile, I made one final call to a journalist friend, Peter Lang, an old reporter who had once profiled Holt Industries during its rise. He owed me a favor. Peter, I said, you'll want to be at the shareholder meeting next week. Bring your camera crew. What's the story? He asked. Legacy, I said. And what happens when someone tries to steal it? The night before the meeting, I ironed my suit. The same one I wore at the company's 10th anniversary gala. The wool had softened with time, but the seams still held. I set out my cufflinks silver, engraved with my initials, and polished my shoes until I could see the reflection of a man who looked both older and sharper than the one who started all this. I packed the black case, the forged contract, Mira's audit, the USB drive, my reinstated clause, and the original founding charter. Then I wrote one final note, folded it, and placed it on my desk. If you build something worth keeping, expect to defend it more than once. When dawn broke, I was already in the lobby of Holt Industries, watching the staff trickle in. Dylan arrived last, surrounded by assistants and cameras. His smile was wide, perfect, performative. He caught sight of me and paused. Ray, he said cautiously, didn't expect you here this early. I built the schedule, I said. Remember? His jaw tightened, but the cameras were watching, so he laughed lightly. "Good to see you still care." "I always care," I said. "That's what separates builders from thieves." Before he could respond, a voice over the intercom announced, "Shareholder meeting begins in 5 minutes." He adjusted his tie, then gave me that smug little half-smile. "Try to enjoy the show." "Oh," I said, stepping closer. "I will." In that moment, as he walked toward the boardroom's bright stage, I felt the past 40 years compress into a single breath. Every sleepless night, every near collapse, every handshake, every betrayal, all of it converging toward this morning. Tomorrow, I thought, there will be headlines. But today is the reckoning. The boardroom that morning could have doubled as a film set. Rows of glass panels caught the early sunlight and scattered it across polished wood. Cameras perched at the back of the room like quiet birds waiting to record history. Nameplates gleamed, microphones hummed softly, and a subtle current of expectation ran through the air, that peculiar mix of ambition and fear that only ever visits a company on the edge of transformation. At the head of the table, Dylan Merritt stood beaming, the perfect picture of corporate youth. His navy suit was flawless, his hair immaculately parted, his charm dialed to its highest setting. The man had rehearsed every gesture. I could tell. I had once done the same. "Welcome, everyone," he began, voice amplified through the ceiling speakers. "Today marks a new chapter for Holt Industries, a future built on innovation, transparency, and renewal." The irony of that last word didn't escape me. I sat quietly 3 seats down, hands clasped, expression unreadable. To my right sat Margaret Reeve, posture straight as a blade. To my left, Daniel Varga, eyes flicking between me and the projection screen, waiting for a signal that would come when it needed to. The meeting began smoothly. Reports were presented, profits reviewed. Applause followed where it was supposed to. The usual ceremony of success. Yet beneath it all was a brittle tension, like glass under strain. Finally, Dylan clicked to the last slide, Leadership Transition and Vision 2030. There it was, the announcement he'd been engineering for months. He turned toward me, that gracious host smile stretched to perfection. "Before we unveil our next steps," he said, "I'd like to take a moment to honor the man who made all of this possible. Raymond Holt, our founder, our mentor, and most importantly, our inspiration." The applause came on cue. Cameras flashed. Even I clapped once, softly. He went on, his words polished, rehearsed, hollow. "As you all know, Mr. Holt has chosen to retire fully from company operations. His vision brought us here, and our duty now is to honor that legacy by carrying it forward into a new era. In that spirit, I'm humbled to announce the final phase of our transition plan, the appointment of new board leadership." He paused for dramatic effect, then continued, "Effective immediately. The board has approved the transfer of full operational control to the current executive team, with me as acting CEO." Cameras clicked again. The press began taking notes. Dylan stood taller, basking in the attention. I waited for silence before standing. "Congratulations," I said calmly, my voice carrying across the room. "A well-executed transition." He smiled cautiously, unsure of where I was going. "But before we move to the vote," I continued, "I believe it's important to clarify a few minor details regarding the legality of that transition." A flicker crossed his face, confusion first, then irritation. "Of course," he said smoothly. "If this is about formality, it's about fraud," I interrupted. The room froze. Chairs creaked. The photographers lowered their cameras. "Excuse me," he said, the smile faltering. I reached down, unlatched the black case at my feet, and lifted out a single folder thick, sealed with a red ribbon. "I'd like to enter into the record a supplemental document pertaining to the so-called retirement agreement Mr. Merritt presented to me 3 weeks ago. I walked to the projector, inserted a flash drive, and clicked. The large screen behind him flickered to life with scanned images. My signature, the clause he forged, the transaction trails Mira had uncovered. Line by line, the evidence appeared for everyone to see, contracts cross-referenced, timestamps highlighted, account transfers traced to shell companies. The silence that filled the room was electric. Dylan laughed nervously. "Raymond, I'm not sure what this is." "This," I said, turning to face the audience, "is what happens when ambition forgets gratitude." Murmurs rippled. Across the table, I clicked again. Another slide appeared, Mira's audit summary, stamped and signed by both her and our legal compliance officer. "Our internal audit confirms a pattern of asset diversion under Mr. Merritt's authority. These transactions, disguised as vendor consolidations, redirected company funds into private subsidiaries, all linked to his personal accounts through proxy shareholders." I looked directly at him. "Your fingerprints are all over it, Dylan. Literally. Metadata doesn't lie." His face drained of color. He stammered, "You can't. You're twisting." "I haven't twisted anything. You did that yourself when you forged my signature." Gasps erupted. Someone at the far end whispered, "Forged." I lifted the folder higher. "This is the contract Mr. Merritt asked me to sign, the one that supposedly finalized my retirement. I signed it, yes. But he didn't realize that an earlier charter clause, one I reinstated months before, automatically transfers controlling shares back to the Founders Trust if fraudulent intent is detected, which means that as of this moment, every share you redirected now legally belongs to me." A thunder of whispers filled the room. Margaret leaned forward, her expression unreadable but satisfied. Daniel was smiling faintly, eyes gleaming with vindication. Dylan's composure fractured. You can't prove intent." I took the remote again and clicked. The screen shifted to an image of the USB drive I had found in his office, now labeled Exhibit C. A3. Transition plan final. Document appeared in full view. Phase. Complete founder. Separation. Post-transition narrative. Modernization under new leadership. Public framing. Health-related step down. Gasps again. Someone muttered, "He planned it." I met his eyes. "Intent enough for you?" He looked around, desperate for support. But the faces that once smiled at him now looked away. Board members avoided his gaze. The reporters began whispering into their recorders, already shaping the story that would define his downfall. I let the silence stretch, heavy and humiliating. Then I said quietly, "You wanted transparency. Here it is." He lunged for the microphone. "This is manipulation. He's lying." "He's trying to take back control," Margaret cut in sharply. "Mr. Merritt, you are out of order." "I'm the acting CEO." "Not anymore," she said, turning to the legal counsel seated nearby. "Effective immediately, I'm calling for an emergency board vote on Mr. Merritt's removal pending full investigation." The counsel nodded, already typing the resolution. One by one, the board members raised their hands. Daniel, Mira, Margaret, every one of my silent allies, even two who had previously backed Dylan. The motion passed unanimously. The reporters captured everything: the raised hands, the stunned expression on Dylan's face, the founder standing calm in the storm he built. It was over, but I wasn't finished. I approached him slowly, deliberately, so the cameras could capture every word. "You thought legacy was a trophy, Dylan, something you could inherit like a parking space. But legacy isn't possession. It's stewardship. It's earned every day you show up when no one else does. You thought you could steal it?" I paused, voice low and measured. "But you only proved how small you were standing next to it." He looked up at me, eyes wide and hollow. "You set me up," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "You built the trap. I just let you walk into it." Then I turned to the press and said, "Holt Industries will remain under ethical review, with all proceeds restored to the company trust. Effective immediately, I will resume oversight until new leadership is appointed, leadership chosen on merit, not marriage." Applause erupted, hesitant at first, then genuine. Not because they liked me, but because they had just witnessed justice in real time. After the meeting, as Dylan was escorted out by security, I stepped outside onto the balcony overlooking the city. The clouds had parted. Sunlight broke across the skyline, reflecting off the mirrored towers that bore my name. Emily approached quietly. Her eyes were red, but her shoulders squared. "I didn't know it would go that far," she said softly. "I know," I said, "but it had to." She leaned on the railing beside me. "He ruined everything." I shook my head. "No, he revealed everything. There's a difference." She looked at me, tears catching light. "What happens to him now?" "The law will decide that. But life has a way of finishing the sentences we start." We stood there a long while, saying nothing. The city moved beneath us, cars, people, trains, all indifferent to the quiet reckonings happening above. Finally, she asked, "Did you ever want to forgive him?" I smiled faintly. "Forgiveness is never the hard part. Trust is. And I'm not in the business of rebuilding what someone tried to burn." She nodded. "What will you do now?" I looked out at the horizon. "What I've always done. Build. Just not walls this time. People." Inside, the boardroom had emptied, leaving only the echoes of what had happened, a few fallen papers, an unplugged microphone, the smell of ozone from hot projectors. On the big screen, frozen mid-sentence, was Dylan's face, the moment he realized the coup had failed. I turned it off. Then I sat in the chair he once thought was his. The leather was still warm. I took out my notebook and wrote a single line across the first page of a new chapter. Revenge completes a circle. Justice builds a future. The building was quiet the next morning, too quiet for a place that had spent the day before cracking under the weight of truth. The air itself seemed unsure of its purpose, like it didn't yet know whether to carry pride or shame. I walked the length of the marble lobby before anyone else arrived, listening to my footsteps echo through the stillness. The security guards nodded, a little differently than before. Respect, cautious but sincere. Even the receptionist's smile carried something unspoken, a small flicker of reassurance that things might steady again. For the first time in months, the company felt honest. Wounded, yes, but honest. I rode the elevator alone to the 42nd floor, hands in my pockets, eyes watching the numbers ascend. The doors opened with a soft tone that sounded almost like relief. Inside my office, the blinds were half open. Sunlight poured across the desk, highlighting the black case that had been the weapon and witness of it all. I placed my hand on it gently. The metal was cool, smooth, unassuming. It had held every secret that could have destroyed me, and every truth that restored me. I exhaled. Not victory, not yet. Something quieter, something closer to peace. At 10 a.m., the board reconvened, smaller now, humbler. Margaret led the proceedings, her tone firm but fair. Dylan's name had already been removed from the digital attendance list. His office was sealed, pending legal review. The press had printed the story before dawn. Founder outsmarts corporate coup. Holt's trap exposes fraud at the top. The world loved a redemption arc. But redemption, I knew, wasn't about headlines. It was about what you did after the cameras stopped rolling. "Mr. Holt," Margaret said at the close of the meeting, "the board is formally reinstating you as acting chairman, until a successor is appointed. Holt Industries remains in your care." I nodded, though part of me resisted the weight of those words. "Thank you," I said simply. "But the company doesn't belong to me. It belongs to everyone who still believes work should mean something." They applauded not the polite kind, but the genuine, exhausted kind. People clapping for decency after a long drought. When the room emptied, I stayed behind. I walked to the wall of photographs, each one capturing a moment I'd almost forgotten. The groundbreaking, the first product launch, the team of 5 who started it all in that garage, that smelled of solder and coffee. And then one photo that made me pause. Emily, at 8 years old, standing beside me in front of an unfinished prototype, her tiny hands smudged with grease, her smile proud, unguarded, reminded me of a truth I'd almost let Dylan erase. The reason I built this in the first place wasn't to be remembered. It was to give the people I loved something worth belonging to. That afternoon, I called Emily. She answered from home. Her voice was soft, cautious. "How are you?" "Tired," I admitted. "But breathing easier." There was a pause. "I went to see Dylan this morning." I stayed silent. "He's devastated," she said. "Not because he lost the job. Because he lost you." I closed my eyes. "He lost himself long before I came into it." She hesitated. "He said you were right about everything. That he forgot what the company stood for." I walked to the window, watching the sunlight catch on the mirrored towers across the street. "Then maybe he's finally learning what humility feels like." "Do you think he can change?" she asked. "Anyone can," I said. "But not everyone will." Another pause. I could hear her breathing, fragile, thoughtful. "Dad," she whispered, "thank you for not destroying him completely." "I didn't need to," I said. "The truth did that on its own." She gave a sad laugh. "He asked me if I'd ever forgive him." "What did you say?" "I told him forgiveness isn't mine to give. It's something he'll have to earn from himself." I smiled. "That's my girl." We sat in silence for a while, connected by a quiet line only family can share, the kind built not from words, but from shared endurance. Before hanging up, she said, "I'm proud of you." I chuckled softly. "I'm proud of you for asking the questions most people run from." When I hung up, the office felt lighter. The storm had passed, but its echo still lingered in the corners, not painful, just honest, like a scar that doesn't ache anymore but reminds you of where the blade was. I poured myself a glass of water and sat down at my desk, opening a fresh notebook. The first page waited, empty, generous. I began to write, not strategy this time, not revenge, reflection. I wrote about trust, how it's not something you lose in a single betrayal, but something you let erode one compromise at a time. I wrote about power, how the wrong hands use it like a weapon, and the right hands hold it like a promise. I wrote about age, how the world confuses wisdom with weakness, until wisdom decides to speak. And I wrote about Dylan not as a villain, but as a warning. The danger of confusing success with ownership. The tragedy of wanting the crown, but not the cost. When I finished, I leaned back and let the pages breathe. Justice, I realized, isn't loud. It doesn't always shout or slam doors. Sometimes it arrives quietly, wearing the same shoes you've worn all your life, walking the same hallways, just finally facing the right direction. That evening, I walked through the building one last time. The air smelled faintly of citrus and metal polish. In the elevator lobby, the name Holt shone across the glass wall, the same letters I had once touched with trembling hands, wondering if they'd outlive me. Now, they no longer felt like a monument. They felt like a mirror, not of me, but of everything we had built and lost and learned. I took the elevator down to the lobby. The security guard held the door. "Good night, Mr. Holt." "Good night, Thomas," I said. "Take care of this place while I'm gone." He smiled. "Always do." Outside, the evening had settled softly over the city. The skyline glowed like molten steel cooling after a forge. I walked toward the river. The air was cool, carrying the scent of rain and asphalt, the smell of real life, of things that keep moving even when stories end. When I reached the bridge, I stopped halfway. The water below shimmered with 1,000 reflected lights, restless and alive. I leaned on the railing and thought of my wife, of Emily, of every moment I'd mistaken silence for peace, and every time I'd chosen restraint over rage. The truth is, justice doesn't heal you. It frees you to start healing yourself. The next day, I called an emergency company-wide meeting, not to celebrate, to rebuild. The auditorium filled with employees, engineers, designers, accountants, interns, people who had feared what might happen to their jobs when the scandal broke. I stood on stage with no presentation, no slide deck, no teleprompter, just my hands clasped and my voice steady. "I won't stand here and pretend this hasn't been a hard season," I said. "We've been shaken. We've seen what happens when ambition outruns integrity. But what matters isn't the fall. It's what we do after we get up." Faces turned toward me, cautious at first, then curious. "This company isn't a logo or a name," I continued. "It's 1,000 ordinary people doing extraordinary work. It's the programmer fixing code at midnight, the janitor keeping the floors spotless, the assistant who remembers what everyone else forgets. It's you. And as long as you care, Holt Industries will stand." Someone in the back started clapping. It spread slowly, then all at once. Not thunderous applause, just a kind of collective exhale. The sound of people deciding to believe again. When it quieted, I said one last thing. Legacy doesn't belong to the one who starts the story. It belongs to those who keep it honest. Then I stepped away from the microphone. Weeks passed. Investigations concluded. Dylan's fraud was confirmed. Charges were filed. He faced fines, public disgrace, and the loss of everything he thought defined him. I never visited him in court. I didn't need to. Justice had already done what revenge never could. It taught him to look at himself. Emily eventually took a leave of absence. She needed time to grieve, to rebuild her life without the illusion that love and loyalty were the same thing. We spoke often, not about business, but about gardens, books, and memories. She smiled more these days. Her voice carried light again. As for me, I began preparing the company for its next chapter. I started mentoring a young executive team, one that understood transparency wasn't just a slogan. I told them the same thing I once told Dylan, but this time I meant it as a warning and a gift. "Build something worth defending," I said. "And remember, the day you forget why it matters is the day you start losing it." On my final evening as acting chairman, I returned to the office one last time. The skyline was crimson with sunset. I turned off the lights and sat in the dark, watching the reflection of the city shimmer on the glass. For the first time in years, I felt no need to prove anything. The company would live on, and so would I, not as a man haunted by betrayal, but as one tempered by it. I thought of all the versions of myself that had stood in this room: the builder, the dreamer, the father, the fool. And I realized that justice hadn't changed me. It had revealed me. It had stripped away the noise and left only the truth. That doing the right thing is never about winning. It's about staying right when everything around you tilts toward wrong. I stood, took my coat, and walked to the elevator. The hallway lights dimmed behind me one by one. When the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the steel panel, older. Yes, but certain. A man who'd finally learned that peace is not the absence of battle, but the quiet that follows when the right one has been fought. The elevator chimed. The doors opened to the night. I stepped out into the cool air, the world humming softly around me, not triumphant, just alive. And as I crossed the lobby, I thought of the viewers, The unseen audience who would one day hear this story, maybe while scrolling late at night, maybe while wondering whether doing the right thing still matters in a world that rewards the wrong. I'd tell them this: when your moment comes when someone underestimates your silence or mistakes your patience for surrender, remember, storms don't always roar. Some just arrive, open their hands, and take back what was always theirs. I paused at the door, turned one last time toward the tower that bore my name, and smiled. What would you have done in my place? That's not a question for guilt. It's a mirror for truth. Comment below. Like this video, and subscribe for more stories not of revenge, but of reckoning. Then I stepped into the night, and the city exhaled,